Hello and welcome to the Buffalo News latest edition of the Further Review podcast. I am Jay Skurski, joined as always, at least through the first 3 weeks here, by my boss, Executive Sports Editor Perryn Keys. And Perryn, quick turnaround, second podcast in a week after the second Bills game in a week. The Bills improved to 3-0 on the season, 31-21 victory over the Miami Dolphins on Thursday night at Highmark Stadium. I know Thursday because I wrote probably 15 times today Sunday's game and then went back and changed it to Thursday's game. Such is life when you're operating on a couple hours of sleep after a long night. But what stood out to you? We'll just start here. What stood out to you the most about the victory over the Dolphins, a victory that was probably a little closer than many fans expected or hoped?
Yeah, starting into first, you're just going to have to take my word for it. I'm not a gambler. I'm fascinated by the line movement, stuff like that. I've never actually placed a legal wager on any kind of game, and I'd like to take that to the grave. But I was, this game opened up, I think, at 12.5. Mm-hmm. Bills were 12.5, and I moved down to 11.5, and I always thought that was a ton of points. It's easy to say this now, I understand. I always thought that was a ton of points for a division game and a tight week. And I understand the Dolphins were 0-2 and sort of a team in flux and everything. It's a ton of points for a division game and two teams that know each other and everything like that. So. But it was a game that was tight and in some ways not terribly surprising, just given the fact that you've got two teams that know each other very well. Well, first things first, Josh Allen, this was going to be a topic that we were going to bring up. 22 of 28, the passing game kind of fell asleep a little bit there in the second half for a little while, allowed the Dolphins to stay in it for quite a while. But first and foremost, you've got a team that doesn't turn the ball over. Mm-hmm. 0 turnovers now for 3 weeks in a row. And that, to me, is the biggest thing. That's the thing that is keeping, I don't want to say keeping the Bills afloat. You're talking about a team that's 3-0, the first 3-0 team in the NFL. But you're talking about a team that hasn't played, to me anyway, for a team that's 3-0 and has got all of its goals very much in front of it. You're talking about a team that really, to me, hasn't put a complete game together yet. And that's a good thing, obviously. If you've got all your goals in front of you, you're undefeated still, you still haven't put your complete game together, and you've still undefeated. So this is great. A team that hasn't beaten itself yet and has been able to do all the things that it needs to do.
That's a perfect way of putting it. This is a team that will not beat itself. Right. It is going to make you go out there and prove that you can beat it. And for a while, it looked like the Dolphins had that opportunity. And then they did until they didn't, right? They make the one mistake that, you can't make. Deion Walker gets good pressure. Tua throws it right to Terrell Bernard, and it's the, kind of the game-clinching interception. It's interesting, though, when I was listening to you give that answer, talking about Allen, and you read off his numbers. 13 of 14 now the Bills have beaten the Dolphins. That includes 6 in a row. Obviously, Allen's mastery over Miami has kind of become well-known. But if we just extend this beyond just the Dolphins and the 3-0 start and the no takeaways, the evolution of Allen entering the league. It's this wild, you got to put a saddle on him, and he's going to make amazing plays, but he's also going to give you the head-scratching, throw across your body to the middle of the field interception at times. That has been erased entirely from his game. Yep. I mean, the guy takes care of the football better than, I don't know, dare I say any quarterback in the NFL right now at this point. I mean, I think there's probably some numbers over the last season and a half that would kind of back up some of that. And it's maybe at its all-time high right now. And Sean McDermott, we heard from him early on Friday, a bit of a change with the Thursday game, talked about how proud of him, of Josh Allen he is for how he's become in terms of, and this is not meant as an insult, managing the game. You hear game manager, that's usually a bad term. But Allen he takes incredible care of the football now. And, you think of the turnover-worthy plays, which is, I know some analytics sites track those. There have not been many of those this year from Josh Allen. And you still get the fabulous, right? You still get the incredible plays on a routine, regular basis, so much so that they've become almost expected. And those plays where you're thinking, boy, what was he doing there, or what was he thinking, what did he see? Those have been almost entirely erased from his game.
And to me, that's maturity isn't even the word for it. It's evolution squared. I don't even know how to put 22 of 28. 6 of the, I'm sure we could go back and think about those 6 incomplete passes couple of those I think you'd have to classify as drops.
At least two.
At least two. I'm
Yeah.
thinking, there was one, obviously, to Keon Coleman. I'm sure Keon would tell you that he has to make that catch on the sideline. Dalton-Kincaid was basically in his hands there in the end zone. Maybe you could say it was a great defensive play. I would say that probably Kincaid himself would probably tell you should have made that catch. A couple of throwaways. I'm sure there's not any coming to mind, but I mean, I'm certain there has to be a couple of throwaways in there. So, I mean, you're talking about again a quarterback who, when he needs to be Superman, he'll be Superman. But when it's time to live and take a check down or just even eat a sack, when he has to eat a sack, as he did at least once in that game, he'll eat a sack and just not make the bonehead early Brett Favre type of interception into triple coverage type of play. He's just not going to do that, and that's. This is Josh Allen in full. This is Josh Allen at the height of his powers, doing the Superman plays and also not making mistakes. That's all you can ask for from a reigning MVP. So, Jay, for the rest of the offense, actually, we want to talk about an offense that, we discussed this, in terms of a football team that doesn't seem like it's played a complete game yet. You've had each of these phases of the Buffalo Bills team that has looked exceptional at times, but not all three for 60 minutes, right? One of these things is the receiving unit, but the tight ends in this game, particularly Dalton-Kincaid, probably certainly his best game this season. 5 catches, team high 66 yards, 1 touchdown. Certainly his best performance of the young season. Caught that bubble screen down there for 19 yards all the way down, almost to the goal line. And the other thing I was going to bring up, not to sidetrack this and take it away from Kincaid, but Jackson Hawes shows out and catches his first touchdown pass as a pro, but certainly I think it's been well established already through 3 weeks as a rookie that he's maybe one of the best blocking tight ends, certainly that the Bills have, maybe one of the best blocking tight ends in the NFL. And that also says now you're starting to have to wonder if the Bills don't have the best overall group with Dawson Knox as well, one of the best overall group of tight ends in the NFL. Just tell me what you think about all this with Kincaid and also the tight end group as a whole.
Yeah, so with Hawes, the first thing that comes to mind is how much fun he's having. This is a fifth round pick, and he comes in, and what a situation to land in, right?
Yeah.
You're playing with the MVP. You've got good guys in your room in Knox and Kincaid who are leaders, who are excellent players in their own right. And so Jackson Hawes, every time we talk to him in the locker room, this guy is just beaming, the smile on his face, and for good reason. I mean, what a moment for him to get his first touchdown there. It looks like Allen's got a chance to run it in, and instead he just flips it to Hawes, and they're giving him grief about his spike and everything like that. So he's having a lot of fun. He's got a role in this offense, though, to your point. And this is something that we talked about with Lance and Catherine and myself. We sort of huddled a little bit as we were heading out of there in the wee hours of the morning after the game. But the personnel packages and the ability that the Bills have to throw 13 personnel and 22 personnel and 11 personnel, they can roll just a number of different lineups. Joe Brady can, and that's important because we'll circle this back to what you said at the beginning there. The wide receivers, the production was inconsistent, and that might be putting it kindly, from the guys that you would expect probably. Khalil Shakir does make the big touchdown catch at the end. Elijah Moore, I thought, maybe had low-key the play of the game, sitting down in that zone.
Yep.
They convert. That's 2nd and 16. He picks up 30 yards. I mean, that's a huge play in that game. He's carved out a bit of a role. He's really kind of taken the Curtis Samuel role is honestly what he's done. Shakir, what you're going to get. Palmer and Coleman right now, it's been hit and miss, right?
Yep.
There's been some really good production from Coleman, obviously, in week 1. Kind of quiet the last couple of weeks. Kincaid, though, is a guy, and we'll get back to what we wanted to really dive into here. I asked this of Sean McDermott and Joe Brady today. I said, these are exactly the type of plays that you guys have been starving for from this guy, right? He opens the scoring against Baltimore. He opens the scoring last night against Miami. That play that you mentioned earlier where he gets down at the 1, his teammates were giving him a lot of grief that he didn't score there, but, he advances the ball. Basically, it's a, for sure touchdown a play or two later. But my thing with Dalton Kincaid, as a rookie, the volume was there, certainly as a pass catcher. Last year it wasn't a good year, and that's not me editorializing. That's the Bills would tell you that.
And he was hurt.
He was hurt. Too, yes. Yeah, that plays into it, but he did not have the production that they needed from him, and so much so that they challenged him in the offseason. You got to get stronger. You got to come back. And I've noticed a different player. I've noticed a different mentality in terms of the way that he even approaches his dealings with us, and that's obviously a small part of his job. But I think he's been very professional, and this is a guy that was traded up for in the first round, and the reason that they did that is because you believe that he can be an impact player. He can make plays that change the game. 2 out of the 3 weeks, I would say that he's done that in a very positive, meaningful way for this team. All right, Perryn, as we usually do, we want to highlight the positive, but we also don't want to gloss over the negative. And in this game, I think certainly at halftime, you could almost hear the angst amongst Bills fans, either from in the stadium or even through the TVs at home. The third down defense, it goes 0 for 11, the Jets do in week 2 on third down. And you're thinking, all right, well, the Bills got that issue figured out. Well, think again, 8 out of 10 in the first half for Miami on third down, including that long, maddening touchdown drive that ties up the game late in the second quarter. Dolphins finished 10 of 15, so the Bills did get incrementally better in the second half on third down. But, this dating back to last season, this is an issue for this defense. Particularly the thing for me that stands out is these third and long situations, 3rd and 7 plus. I mean, we're joking in the press box that the Dolphins have them right where they want them when it's 3rd and 12, and that is a problem that I think with this 10-day break here in between week 3 and week 4, I think the defensive staff and Sean McDermott really need to dive into what's going wrong in those 3rd and long situations.
Yeah, I know that you guys met with Sean McDermott and the coordinators this morning, Friday morning. About that, and I know that was one of the first things, if not the first thing, that they addressed this morning. Him and the defensive staff queued up all the third downs
right, yep.
that they watched. That was the first thing they watched on Friday morning right after the game, because hey, this wasn't, just as you said, this was an issue for all the great things they did last year. The Bills defense, that was one of the things that they did have an issue with, basically all season long, and that it cropped up in week 1 against Baltimore. You could not have done any better in week 2 against the New York Jets, and now here it rears its ugly head against the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins, I don't want to say they played down a distance, because just as you said, they got in a lot of 3rd and longs.
Yeah.
But every time they needed a 3rd and long conversion, they got it. Tyreek Hill showed up a lot in that second quarter drive right before halftime on those third downs, and then later on they got a lot of. I thought Jalen Waddle had a lot of success going against Tre'Davious White. Seemed like a lot of crossers and really down the field for that matter on third down. I don't know if that was an issue where they just thought that was a good matchup, or the Tre'Davious was just a little slow off the ball, or just what. But it was. In a lot of ways, it was sort of pick your poison. The thing too that I think everybody probably noticed was that the Dolphins weren't going deep. Mm-hmm. That Tua was going to get the ball out in probably less than 2 seconds, almost on every single occasion, and that was obviously going to limit the ability for the Bills pass rushers to get in there and get home and disrupt the pocket and be able to get home on third down. So, this is something that they're going to have to take a look at, and that was going to be the way that the Dolphins were going to operate, but it's also something now that, all the other opponents the Bills are going to face are going to have on tape to look at and say, okay, well, is this going to be an effective thing that we can do also as we go down the road? So this is something they're going to have to fix. And again, is this a one-time thing? Is this a two out of 3 week thing that's just sort of a one-off or a two-off, so to say? Or is this something that's going to be an issue all year? This is, again, just as you said, this is something that McDermott and his staff are going to have to address. And let's not forget, no Ed Oliver, no Matt Milano, and, you don't have. Let's not forget, it's easy to sort of forget in the madness of all this. 3 weeks into the season, you're going to get some reinforcements too on the defensive line, the front seven, and also potentially in the secondary. We just don't know. We don't know what we don't know about Max Harrison yet either.
Mm-hmm. It's a weird defensive game when you look at it. Tua throws for 146 yards and needs 34 attempts to do it. 130 rushing yards. That's probably a total that's a little higher than the Bills would like. They also got some 3-and-outs, at least 3 of them that I can think of, and those are big. That's obviously what you strive for as a defense. But the third down conversions, the long ones, the thing that it does is that it just makes life more difficult because, to your point, they won the turnover battle again. It's 25 straight games now that they've done that. That's an NFL record. You mentioned at the start, you're not a betting man. At some point, they're going to lose that turnover battle, right? And if that happens, the defense has got to get off the field, right? So you can't rely on the turn. I'm cautious in saying that because they've done it for a long time now that they've relied on the turnovers and they've gotten them. But the issue is when your third down defense struggles, when you can't get off the field, if you don't take the ball away, that's how teams hang in games. And we saw that with Miami for most of this game. The Tua interception came very, very late. So, yeah, it was just a weird statistical game where the Bills did some really good things defensively, but then there were very clear and obvious issues moving forward that they need to address.
The third downs were what kept, to me anyways, it felt like that's what kept Miami in the game. Because the Bills, it felt like a game the Bills dominated basically, almost not all the way start to finish, but they held the advantage in almost every other statistical category, and it felt like a game that they kind of control. But then you look up at the scoreboard, and they're either ahead only 7 points or the game's tied the entire way. So it was a tough game from start to finish. Taking a look, we usually take a look at the rest of the AFC East. We'll take a look at the rest of the AFC as well. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here. We're only in week 3, but hey, look, Bills have started 3-0. They're obviously the first 3-0 team in the NFL and the AFC. So they certainly did what they needed to do against Baltimore. They put themselves ahead in the early running in the AFC playoff picture. And again, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. But hey, it's fun to look at. They're obviously in the lead in the AFC East. And let's take a look around the AFC. First of all, starting in the division, Pittsburgh at New England. Pittsburgh is going to be, if I'm not mistaken, they're a 1.5-point favorite at New England. The Jets play at Tampa Bay. We saw the Jets, of course, on last Sunday. Tampa Bay is a 6.5-point favorite. But then we take a look at the rest of the AFC. The Chargers, let's start with the Chiefs, of course. The big bad Chiefs, they're 0-2. They desperately need a win. They play at the Giants. Baltimore, of course, is going to be another contender. They're 2-1. They're hosting Detroit, probably one of the better Monday night games we'll see this season. And then the Chargers, they're 2-1, if I'm not mistaken. Or excuse me, they're 2-0. Yeah, they're 2-0.
Yep.
And they play the Broncos. So if you're a Bills fan, again, we're not going to get too far ahead of ourselves, but quiet as it's kept, you might want to be rooting for Denver to go into L.A. and maybe win that game. So, Jay, just take a look around the AFC, if you will.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm just looking at some of these games. To me, I highlighted the Detroit-Baltimore game as, I think, the game of the week. I know it's two 1-1 teams, and there are a couple of matchups. I know at least one 2-0. 2-0 is Arizona-San Francisco. But Detroit-Baltimore on Monday is a great game. I think rightfully so. This is going to get some talk about a potential Super Bowl preview. If you're the Bills, clearly when it's an NFC team going up against an AFC team, you're rooting heavy on the Lions for this one. But, to your point, Perryn, it's not too soon to be talking about the number 1 seed. That's the goal for this franchise.
Sure.
And you've started 3-0, 3-0 in the conference, 2-0 in the division. You've got the head-to-head win on Baltimore. You've got the opportunity to have the head-to-head win on Kansas City, who is now 0-2 and is really chasing it with a game against Baltimore in Week 4. So, yeah, I think, that's the benefit of winning these Thursday games. You get to kick your feet up. You get this, the so-called mini bye, and now you get to kind of watch the rest of the conference play and sort of see how this race unfolds. To me, the division game, the Jets, they start 0-3. Tampa's a tough team. Tampa's dealing with a ton of injuries, but if the Jets start 0-3 right there with Miami, I mean, at that point, your season's darn near over.
Pretty close.
Right? Pretty darn close. And then, Pittsburgh, New England, I think, is a big one for potential, talk about wild card teams, and we'll see where that goes. Denver, LA, to me, is right up there among the 2 or 3 best games because I think both of those teams are going to feel, the winner of that team is going to feel, hey, the division is there for us.
Yep.
We can win this division, and that's including, the Chiefs being in that division, right? And then one other game that I think we should mention real quick that I'm very interested to see is Cincinnati, Minnesota. Battle of backup quarterbacks. Both starters are out. The Bengals have started 2-0 here, but now without Joe Burrow for an extended stretch, what does that mean to them? I think there's a significant portion of Bills fans who view the Bengals as right underneath the Chiefs as being the big bad kind of team that you don't want to see. And I think a lot of that, dates to the playoff loss that the Bills had to the Bengals. There's a healthy respect, I think, among many Bills fans for the Bengals. I'm really interested to see. Jake Browning is, I would say, probably on the upper echelon of backups around the league. Can he keep them not even just afloat, but can he keep them in the race until Burrow gets back? That, to me, is a real interesting game.
Certainly, I'd say it's safe to say that historically, in the last 4 or 5 years, Cincinnati has been a difficult matchup for the Bills. That's safe to say. One last note on Kansas City. I think, probably the last few years, it's safe to say that Kansas City was in one of the easier divisions, and if I may be so bold as to say, probably one of the divisions that had some of the worst coaching in terms of the Chargers, Las Vegas, and Denver. And now you've got a division full of coaches who have either won a national championship, won a Super Bowl, or both.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be easy now as you go down the road, and they're 0-2. And, frankly, they're going to get Rice back at some point. They're going to get Worthy back. But Patrick Mahomes doesn't have the kind of weapons he had before. So, yes, they really, really need a win going back east to face the Giants. They can't afford to go to 0-3.
And as I mentioned, Bills fans and the Bills themselves get to kind of kick their feet up this weekend and watch all those games unfold. We will do a little bit of the same, but there will still, of course, be daily coverage of the Buffalo Bills coming off of their Week 3 win against Miami at buffalonews.com and in the print edition of the Buffalo News. We will be back on September 29th. That is a Monday following the Week 4 game against the New Orleans Saints. So for Jay Skurski, he's Perryn Keys. I'm Jay Skurski, not for me. I'm Jay Skurski. Thank you so much for watching the latest edition of the Further Review podcast, and we will talk with you again soon.